Welcome to Dan Lee Boat Building. If you're a regular to the channel, then you will have seen the previous videos where we've been restoring this Healey 75. If not, then make sure you jump back and take a look at some of those, because there's lots of work that we've done to get the boat where it is today. In this video, we're going to be installing the prop shaft strut on the boat and creating an epoxy pad that shims it into the right place so that we can get good alignment of the shaft when it comes to installing the engine. This video was originally going to be about painting the bottom and installing the shaft, but when I did the editing, it just worked out well to do the shaft strut as a little video on its own. So that's what this is going to be. And then in the next video, I'm going to fill you in on painting the bottom. So without further ado, let's get started. So we've come to the point of needing to put the prop shaft strut back into this boat, or position it back where it needs to be. And there's probably a few things that have changed since the last time this strut was here. As you've seen if you watched some of the previous videos, we've done some quite major changes to the shape of the keel where it was all deformed, and we've ground a lot of the fiberglass away. So this is almost certainly not going to go back where it originally was. And what we need to do is to make sure that this is going to line up with the shaft log that is going through the boat, so that we can align all three elements. So we've got the shaft strut, we've got the shaft log, and then we've obviously got the engine on the other end of the shaft. So we need to make sure that this is positioned correctly, both forward and aft, left and right, and also at the correct angle as well, so that everything can be lined up. If we were to just bolt this in place, it could be the case that the shaft wouldn't even go through the shaft log in its current position. So we want to make sure it's nice and central, so when it comes to engine installation and alignment, it's going to go nicely. So what we need to do is to position this. So we've got the original holes underneath here. Before we did all the filler work on the bottom of the boat, we drilled those through the oak pad that's on the inside. If you remember, we put that in place on the inside of the boat. So we've got those 4 holes in the oak pad. We've obviously filled them from this side. So the first job to do is to drill those back through the bottom of the boat, and then we'll have the position for the shaft strut, and then we can go from there, getting it in the correct angle. So we've got 4 holes that line up with the original mounting holes, and we can get the shaft strut into place just with a couple of loose bolts for now. So that gives us our position longitudinally and athwartships as well. The next thing to do is going to be to make sure that this is straight in line with the shaft log, and also correctly angled. So you can see where the strut's been previously installed here that there's been a shim on the forward end, and that will have been to get the correct angle of the strut in relation to everything else that's going on within the boat. That's not really what we want to do, because if you shim the strut like this, you're only actually going to have it sat in contact with the boat on this little forward band here, and probably a small band aft here, and as you can see, it's probably sat on some sort of bedding compound or Sikaflex or something. So actually the center portion of the strut isn't going to be in contact with the boat, and that's going to create a lot of potential problems. It's potentially going to mean that the angle that this is in relation to the boat is going to alter over time. And the other thing with having a wood shim here is that this can either degrade if it's not properly sealed, or it can compress over time. So what's potentially going to happen is that the angle of this shaft strut is going to alter, perhaps when the boat's in the water, or when it's under load, or just generally over time. And that's going to result in there being a misalignment of the engine with the shaft, so you'll probably see an increased level of vibration over time, and generally it's going to result in poor performance. So what we want to do is make sure that this prop shaft strut is in the correct place, perfectly aligned, sat on a nice bed that keeps it in full contact with the bottom of the boat, so that it's not going to move and it's not going to alter over time. So the first thing that we're going to do is do away with this original pad and clean up the shaft strut base. So now that I've got the base of that nice and clean, we can sit it flush with the boat, drop a couple of bolts in for alignment, and we'll just pop a shaft through that strut and see what we've got to work with. So I've got a nice new cutlass bearing in here, which means that we've got good alignment with the shaft, which is nice, good positioning. So what we can instantly see is that the shaft is just catching the top or the bottom of the shaft hole there. So we know already that we need to come up slightly in order to get this in the right position. Okay, so we've got the shaft roughly placed, and you can see that I had to lift the back end of the strut in order to get the shaft to actually go through the hole. You can just about see the gap there at the aft end, so we know that the strut needs to be leaning forwards in order to get that shaft to go through the hole. So we know that we're going to have to shim it slightly at the aft end. So what I'm going to do next is just go inside the boat and create a little packer that just positions the forward end of the shaft right in the middle of the shaft log. As you can see, there's a fair bit of play in there. Actually, if I've got the packing gland here, I'll probably just put the packing gland on and that should do it. But if not, I'm just going to use something to get that just pinned in the middle position there. Okay, so I've got the forward end of the shaft now centered in the middle of the shaft log, so you can see there's no play in the forward end there. Obviously the aft end of that can still move around, and so can the height of the shaft strut. So we want to just sight down the shaft log and try and make sure that the shaft is running nice and centrally down there, or at least that there's going to be plenty of clearance to make sure that the shaft isn't going to foul when it comes to alignment. So it looks to me like we need to come up just a little bit, but generally that is around about our position that the shaft strut wants to be. So then we can begin creating something that is going to keep this shaft strut in its correct position. So we want to come up just a little bit, but other than that we're pretty good. So I'm going to draw around the outside of that just so that I know where it's going to be. And then what I want to do is to shim this plate so that I know exactly where it's going to be. So for that, I'm just going to grab some washers and we're going to play around and see what works to get it in the right position. Okay, so we've got the strut into position with a range of little washer shims. So you can see we've got quite a gap aft there. So we ended up with one washer forward and 3 washers aft. And that is giving us nice alignment through the shaft log. It's a little bit difficult to show you that, but it's all pretty nice and straight, so I'm happy with that position. There's plenty of clearance around this log that we're not going to run into issues there when it comes to putting the engine in. We're nice and central on the forward end of that shaft log. We're nice and firmly positioned, there's no play in the cutlass bearing. So that is where we want the shaft strut. But obviously we can't just go bolting it into the boat with washers sat underneath it, because that is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than what we had there before. So what we're going to do in order to get that positioned in the right place is cast a pad of epoxy that this is going to sit on, and that is going to mean that we can maintain 100% contact through this shaft strut into the bottom of the boat, and it's going to give a really nice positive alignment and a good seat for it to live there for the rest of its life. So I'll get that taken out and we'll start the process of doing that. Okay, so we've got the area keyed up. That is where our pad's going to go. So the first thing we need to do is to prep this to make sure that the epoxy isn't going to stick to it. And the way we're going to do that is just with a release wax. Any sort of release agent will work pretty well for that. I tend to just use whatever wax I've got here in the shop, which is actually a machine bed wax a lot of the time. So this is what I'm going to use. A mold release wax is the perfect thing, but I haven't got any of that here, so I'm using this stuff, and I've used this before setting threads in epoxy and things like that, and it works really well, so we'll use that today. So just a good amount on the cloth, and then apply it to the bottom of the shaft strut around the edges. Basically going to apply this to everything that we don't want epoxy sticking to, so that also includes the mounting bolts that we're using for now. I'm also just going to tape up the mounting bolts so that they're not going to end up with epoxy on them. So just put some masking tape around those. Okay, so now we have everything waxed up, it is all ready to install. So we're going to go and mix up some epoxy for that. And to put this in place, we're going to be using West System Epoxy and the high density filler additive. So then we're just going to apply the mixture to the surface and create our bed. I'm going to try and avoid these holes for now and focus on getting a good mound of this right in the center, because what we'll actually do is we'll come back and remove these washers once everything's set up. Okay, so I've made sure that I've got plenty of this in the middle, and with a bit of luck that's going to be way more than we need, and it's going to squeeze out and we're going to get a nice good coverage in there. So we'll get our washers in place to set our height. Okay, and then I'm going to try and get some in these outer corners as well, pushed underneath there. Alright, and I'll go inside the boat and just nip all that down. Okay, so it's the following day and the epoxy's nicely cured now. So first thing to do is going to be to get those bolts out, and then we can remove the strut. So there you can see the shot of the cast epoxy shim that's going to align our prop shaft strut. There's a couple of little pockets here that we haven't quite filled in, which is okay because I'm going to fish these washers out anyway. So we'll hook those out, and then we can basically just do another round of the same of what we've done to just fill in these little pockets, and I'll probably completely fill in these and then re-drill the holes through the center of the epoxy afterwards, so we've got a nicely sealed hole there. But you can see that that is a perfect imprint of the shape of the bottom of the casting, which is going to give a really nice positive alignment and complete contact between the base of the shaft strut and the hull of the boat. So that was how we shimmed the prop shaft strut on this boat. I hope you found that a useful little video. The process is taken from the Gougeon brothers book on boat construction using epoxy. It's a really great book, and if you haven't already got it or read it, then I highly recommend it, especially if you're working on boats such as this and modern wooden boats as well. The same process can be utilized for a wide range of things. If you're installing hardware that needs a shim or a pad to sit on, then you can use a similar sort of process if you were fitting a cleat on a heavily cambered deck or something, so that it needs an interface between the curvature of the deck or perhaps the angle of a roll off of a deck that needs a cleat that sits vertically. You can use the same kind of process for creating a nice little shim, and it's a perfect waterproof barrier between that fitting and the deck or whatever the substrate is underneath. So handy little process that I thought would be good for you guys to see. So in the next video I will show you the painting process for the bottom of this boat, and then we'll also be moving on to when we turn the boat back over, because as you can see now it's back up the right way again, and we're doing some more work internally on the boat. We're painting the inside, and then we're going to be doing some repairs to the deck structure as well. So if you haven't already subscribed, then make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to see the rest of the videos, and as we continue through working on this boat we'll keep posting those. So cheers guys, I'll catch you in the next one.